If you already follow this channel, you will know that the Vikings, once upon a time, struck terror into the hearts of people across Europe. Today, we're looking into the secrets of their battle success and are gonna tell you why they were so widely feared. From their groundbreaking tactics to their unstoppable spirit, we're gonna give you the gist on the strategies that made the Vikings legendary. Stick around until the end, and you'll find out just how similar they are to the Trojans with combat tactics. Let's go. The Norsemen had a unique belief that a person's time of death was already set, but everything else in life was up for grabs. This led them to see life as having two possible outcomes: achieving great success and fame, or living a subpar life before facing death. And as you can guess, they went for the first. This mindset drove them headlong into countless battles during what became known as the Viking Age, an age of fighting and victories like never before. Their intimidating tactics, mastery in hand-to-hand combat, and sheer fearlessness made them formidable opponents. Initially, the Vikings raided small towns, but their ambitions quickly grew. These raids evolved into the founding of vital agricultural areas and bustling trade hubs throughout Europe. The Vikings' bright and bold warfare tactics allowed them to carve out empires and secure resources, even though they were outnumbered by their adversaries. Of course, they were the typical example of the saying, "small but mighty." Speaking about might, although the Vikings were mighty, they didn't win every battle they fought. It's a common misconception that these fierce warriors were always victorious and had never lost a single battle. In reality, they faced tough losses, especially when they dared to attack foreign kingdoms and territories. But these failures didn't hold them back. In fact, the Vikings were indeed victorious in many of their endeavors. The treasures they looted are proof of their success, showing us just how impactful the Vikings were during their time, mainly because of their crazy tactics. But it wasn't always first about the tactics on the battlefield. They had a few cunning behind-the-scenes ideas for victory too. Who shouldn't? Thanks to their vast networks, the Vikings were incredibly smart and well-informed. This network provided them with crucial information about the best times to strike, when the treasuries and granaries were full and resistance was likely to be low. They were so well connected that they knew when and where large gatherings like trade fairs would occur. And that's just when they'd launch their attacks. This move drove fear into the hearts of many. A perfect example of using this knowledge came with a raid on Nantes. Every year people flocked to Nantes to celebrate St. John's Eve, honoring John the Baptist. Guess which day the Vikings chose for their attack? Yep, St. John's Eve, when the city was bustling with visitors and less likely guarded. The Vikings had even likely formed an alliance with a local Frankish count who had his own reasons for taking control of the city. This combination of inside knowledge and strategic timing made the Vikings a step ahead in planning their raids. But that wasn't all. The early Middle Ages were a time of constant upheaval, and the Vikings were experts at using this chaos to their advantage. Political turmoil and power struggles often distracted kings and princes who were too busy fighting each other to defend their towns or monasteries against the Vikings' raids. A prime example of this was during the reign of Frankish Emperor Louis the Pious, the son of Charlemagne. His three sons revolted against him, which sparked nearly a decade of civil war. The ever-watchful Vikings seized the opportunity to strike and found it easy to conquer their enemy. They were always well informed about which regions were vulnerable and which were not, allowing them to strategically target areas weakened by internal conflicts. By capitalizing on these power struggles, the Vikings could raid with less resistance, increasing their chances of success and enabling them to reap rich rewards from the weak regions. Now, speaking about the battlefield, the Vikings were known for their strict military organization and innovative battle strategies, which played a big part in their success during their raids. Unlike the typical European tactics of the time, the Vikings had a unique approach that often gave them the upper hand. The usual image of Vikings wildly charging recklessly from their boats into battle is more of a myth. In reality, Viking attacks were likely very strategic, whether carried out by small groups or large armies. For instance, when Danish kings Sweyn Forkbeard and Canute the Great launched their attacks on England in the early 11th century, they didn't just show up with a few men. They brought massive armies with thousands of soldiers and hundreds of ships, all under a well-organized command structure. At the top of this structure was the king, who had the final say in all decisions. The Vikings were masters of surprise, a big part of their success. Their secret weapon? Superior mobility thanks to their longships. These ships, known for their shallow draft hulls, could easily cross the North Sea and zip along Europe's rivers. This allowed them to show up unexpectedly, catching their enemies off guard. There was no time for any slack. As we've said, the Vikings were incredibly successful raiders, and their success came from their exceptional shipbuilding skills. Their ships were swift, which was a big advantage. Although these ships weren't made for sea battles, a type of fighting the Vikings rarely did, they were perfect for speedy travel. These long, narrow vessels could carry 50 to 60 rowers plus an entire team of warriors, making transporting large groups quickly to strategic locations easy. Having numbers wasn't always an issue. One of the most fantastic features of Viking ships was their shallow draft. This allowed them to land directly on sandy beaches, bypassing the need for well-fortified harbors. This ability meant Vikings could show up unexpectedly almost anywhere along the coastline. They could also travel up rivers deep into Europe, reaching inland towns that would have felt safe from sea raiders. Famous rivers like the Elbe, the Weser, the Rhine, the Loire, and the Thames saw Viking ships on their waters. A glorious touch on those seashores. But the Vikings' prowess wasn't limited to the water. They were just as formidable on land, arguably even the best there. The Vikings were known for their small but terrifyingly effective raiding fleets that caused chaos among the local populations in English and Frankish territories. As historian Sprague points out, these tactics were somewhat similar to those used by today's Western Special Forces, small units with clear strategic goals. As years passed, the Vikings shifted gears with the formation of the Great Heathen Army, marking a move toward more organized warfare, with large groups of raiders joining forces to launch bigger attacks on towns and cities from fleets that could include hundreds of ships. If they encountered formal military forces during a raid, Vikings would change to a formation known as a wedge, placing their strongest warriors at the front. They would then start their attack by throwing spears, then charge forward in this wedge formation, breaking through enemy lines to engage in close quarters combat, which was their strong suit. Meanwhile, some warriors who had survived previous sea battles with injuries were tasked with guarding the ships during these land battles, ensuring a secure retreat or further assault capability. There was just no way for them to be left stranded. Like the infamous Trojan horse story, the Vikings also had their own version of a deceptive plot. The tale of the Trojan horse serves as a warning to be cautious of enemies hiding their true intentions, or in this instance, Vikings hiding in coffins. Around AD 860, a Viking leader named Hastin set his sights on proving his prowess by sacking Rome. However, knowing that Vikings were better suited for raiding villages than fortified cities, Hastin hatched a clever scheme to breach the formidable city walls. He pretended to be a dead Norseman needing burial in town. Hastin played dead inside his coffin, while his warriors simply walked through the city gate with him undetected. His plan worked brilliantly, and they gained entry without suspicion. Unfortunately, Hastin discovered a comical mistake after his successful raid. He had actually attacked Luna, not Rome, mistaking one city for the other. Well, the tactics worked anyway. The Viking Age eventually came to an end, as European kingdoms learned how to counter the Vikings' main strengths, their mobility. For instance, these kingdoms began building fortified bridges over rivers. This strategy effectively blocked Viking longships from advancing, while defenders on the bridges could quickly attack the trapped Vikings with a barrage of arrows and stones. Over the years, many Vikings chose to settle down across Europe. Some took over lands by force, while others formed peaceful agreements with local rulers. The era was indeed gone. But for about 250 years, the Vikings were a fearsome presence in Europe. After these changes, they stopped raiding and never returned in the same way again.